What if I told you that the path of the enlightened is never crowded? We think of loneliness as something to be avoided, a punishment, a deficiency in our social nature. But what if this solitude is not a burden, but the very mark of your awakening? You see, the chosen ones, those who glimpse beyond the veil of ordinary consciousness, find themselves walking paths that others cannot yet see. Think about it. When you begin to perceive the world differently, how can you expect others to understand your journey? This is not elitism, but rather the natural consequence of growth. The eagle soars alone not because it rejects the company of other birds, but because few can follow where it must go. You see, we have constructed a society that equates aloneness with failure. From our earliest days, we are taught that to be separate is to be deficient, that isolation indicates something has gone wrong. We celebrate the extrovert, the social butterfly, the team player. We worry about the loner, the hermit, the solitary figure. But have you ever considered that our fear of solitude might actually be a fear of our own depths? Have you ever wondered if our desperate need for constant companionship might be a clever distraction from the profound truths that can only be discovered in silence and separation? I once knew a man who deliberately chose to spend 1 year in a small cabin on the edge of a forest. His friends thought he had lost his mind. His family worried he had fallen into depression. His colleagues assumed he was having some sort of breakdown. But I saw something different in his eyes when he told me of his decision. There was clarity there, and purpose. He was not running away from life, but running toward a deeper understanding of it. When he emerged from that year of solitude, he carried himself differently. He spoke with a quiet certainty that needed no validation. He had found something essential in his aloneness, something that could never have been discovered in the noise of constant social interaction. There are 3 fundamental reasons why those who are awakening must walk a solitary path. First, there exists an awareness gap between the awakened and others that creates an inevitable distance, like a glass wall through which both can see, but neither can truly touch. Second, the shedding of social conditioning requires separation from the very influences that created that conditioning, just as healing from poison requires distance from its source. And third, there is a transformative power in conscious solitude that cannot be accessed in any other way, just as certain rare flowers bloom only in the darkness. The forest path that leads to wisdom is narrow and often overgrown. Few find it, and fewer still choose to follow it once they realize it does not accommodate companions walking side by side. The mountain summit that offers the clearest view stands above the clouds, beyond where most are willing to climb. The lone tree that weathers the storm on the plain grows stronger roots than those clustered in the protected grove. These are not merely poetic images, but profound truths about the nature of spiritual maturation. Society fears aloneness. Society condemns aloneness. Society misunderstands aloneness. And in doing so, it keeps many from the very breakthrough that would allow them to contribute their unique gifts to that same society. The great irony is that those who dare to walk alone often end up creating new paths that others may follow, becoming bridges rather than islands. The mystic, the visionary, the revolutionary thinker, all must first separate from the collective mind before they can offer anything truly valuable to it. True connection can only be born from authentic aloneness. This is the paradox that few are willing to explore. We think we know what connection is, but what we often experience is merely a shared delusion, a mutual agreement to see only what is comfortable and familiar. The depth of connection that becomes possible when two people who know themselves truly meet is of an entirely different order than the superficial attachments that masquerade as intimacy in our culture. Now let me tell you something about this solitary path that might surprise you. It is not about permanent isolation or rejecting human connection altogether. Rather, it is a necessary phase, a chrysalis stage in which transformation occurs before a more authentic form of participation becomes possible. The chosen ones walk alone not because they are above others, but because they are becoming more fully themselves. And only by becoming fully yourself can you offer anything real to the world. Think about it. When you begin to perceive reality differently, you create an inevitable distance between yourself and those still perceiving through conventional lenses. It is not a distance you choose or that you can easily bridge. It is as natural and unavoidable as the gap between different dimensions. Imagine suddenly gaining the ability to see the full spectrum of colors in a world where everyone else perceives only in black and white. At first, you might be excited to share this extraordinary vision. Look at this sunset, you would say. Look at the 1,000 shades of orange and pink melting into purple. But they would only see varying gradients of gray. And soon enough, your enthusiasm would be met with confusion, perhaps even concern. What if you could suddenly hear music that no one else could detect? The subtle symphony of existence that plays beneath the surface of ordinary sound. You might find yourself moving to rhythms others cannot feel, stopping to listen to harmonies no one else acknowledges. Would you begin to doubt your own senses? Or would you recognize that you have simply tuned into a frequency beyond common perception? This is precisely what happens in the process of awakening. The very fabric of your reality begins to shift. The solid world of objects and separate identities starts to appear more like a flowing river of interconnected experiences. Concepts that once seemed absolute become transparent, revealing their provisional nature. Time itself, that master we all obey without question, shows itself to be far more fluid and subjective than our clocks would have us believe. And how exactly do you explain this to someone who has not experienced it themselves? Someone I knew spent years trying to communicate her awakening experience to friends and family. She used every metaphor, every example, every philosophical framework she could find. She wrote poems and drew pictures. She referenced texts from traditions across the world that pointed to the same revelation. And still, she was met with blank stares, nervous laughter, or worst of all, the patronizing nod that says, "Sure, whatever makes you happy." She told me once that it felt like trying to describe an entirely new primary color that she had discovered. How do you convey something for which there exists no shared reference point? It is actually quite amusing when you think about it. We have elaborate languages with hundreds of thousands of words, complex grammatical structures capable of expressing the most nuanced thoughts, and yet they all break down when faced with direct experience that transcends our shared conceptual frameworks. It is like trying to explain water to a fish or air to a bird. The very medium is so pervasive, so fundamental, that it becomes invisible precisely because it is everywhere. The deeper your awakening, the more profound this language barrier becomes. Words themselves begin to feel like clumsy approximations, symbols pointing toward a reality they can never fully capture. You start speaking in paradoxes, not because you enjoy being cryptic, but because paradox is sometimes the closest language can come to truth. This is why mystics across traditions often sound like they are speaking in riddles. They are not being deliberately obscure. They are bumping up against the limitations of language itself. They cannot see what you see. They cannot hear what you hear. They cannot feel what you feel. This is not their fault, nor is it yours. It is simply the nature of consciousness at different stages of unfoldment. Just as you cannot force a rosebud to open before its time, you cannot compel another to perceive what their consciousness is not yet ready to grasp. And this creates an inevitable solitude, a walking apart that has nothing to do with superiority and everything to do with the simple fact of different perceptual realities. This solitude is not about rejecting others or withdrawing from relationship. It is the natural consequence of growth, like the space that forms between friends when one moves to a distant city. The geography of your inner landscape has shifted so dramatically that you now inhabit different territories of consciousness. You can still visit each other, still communicate across the distance, but you no longer share the same daily reality. And there is both sorrow and beauty in this recognition. But here is the thing. This perception gap, this unavoidable distance, is not merely an unfortunate side effect of awakening. It is actually necessary for the continued expansion of your consciousness. If you could instantly translate your new perceptions into terms everyone could understand, if there were no gap at all, it would mean you had not truly transcended the old paradigm, but had merely redecorated it. The very untranslatability of your experience is evidence of its authenticity, its power to take you beyond the collective agreements that define conventional reality. This gap serves another purpose as well. It forces you to find security within yourself, rather than in social validation. When no one around you can fully confirm your experience, you must learn to trust your own deepest knowing. This builds a kind of inner authority, a relationship with truth that depends not on external agreement, but on direct perception. And this inner authority is essential for the next stage of the journey, the shedding of social conditioning that has shaped your mind since birth. Have you ever considered how much of what you believe isn't truly yours? How many of your thoughts were placed in your mind by parents, teachers, friends, television, advertising, and cultural narratives? How many of your desires were manufactured for you by clever marketing? How many of your fears were inherited from generations who faced threats that no longer exist? We are like houses built by other people's blueprints, inhabited by furniture we didn't choose, decorated with paintings whose meaning we have never questioned. We move through these mental structures, assuming they are extensions of our true nature, when in fact they may be elaborate prisons constructed before we were even conscious enough to object. To find authentic connection with yourself and with others, you must first disconnect from this inherited identity. This is the second reason why chosen ones must walk alone. The rivers of social influence run so deep through the terrain of your mind that you cannot hear the quiet spring of your own authentic being while standing in their current. You must step away from the rushing waters, find a place of stillness, to discern which thoughts arise from your essence and which are merely the collected debris of social conditioning floating through your consciousness. Social conditioning operates through three primary mechanisms. First, through expectation, the subtle and not-so-subtle pressures that shape your behavior from earliest childhood. Smile, be polite, compete, consume, achieve, conform. These commands become so deeply embedded that they feel like your own voice. Second, through validation, the system of rewards and punishments that train you like a sophisticated animal to seek approval rather than truth. And third, through shared delusion, the collective agreements about what is real, valuable, and possible that go entirely unquestioned because everyone around you shares them. A woman I knew spent 10 years building a successful career in finance. She had the apartment, the wardrobe, the social circle, and the respect of her peers. By all conventional measures, she was thriving, yet she felt increasingly hollow, as if she were performing in a play she never auditioned for. When a health crisis forced her to take a 6-month leave, she found herself alone in a quiet space for the first time since childhood. At first, the silence was unbearable. She filled every moment with noise, distraction, anything to avoid the emptiness she felt. But gradually, as the external voices faded, she began to hear something else. A quieter voice, one that had been trying to speak to her for years. This voice did not care about status or achievement or fitting in. It spoke of creativity, of service, of a kind of joy she had forgotten existed. It is almost comical how thoroughly we have confused social approval for truth. We think something is right because people nod when we say it. We think something is valuable because others compete for it. We think a path is correct because we see many footprints leading along it. But consensus has nothing to do with reality. At one point, the consensus was that the earth was flat, that bloodletting cured disease, that women lacked the intellectual capacity for higher education. Consensus is merely collective agreement, and collective agreement is shaped by collective conditioning. The socially constructed self, this elaborate identity built from expectations and validations, must undergo a kind of death before your authentic nature can fully emerge. And this death can only happen in solitude, because the very presence of others unconsciously reinforces the old identity. Every interaction pulls you back into familiar patterns, familiar roles, the comfortable prison of who you have been told you are. This is why retreats, vision quests, hermitages, and periods of isolation appear in spiritual traditions across the world. They are not punishments or tests. They are technologies for creating the space in which transformation becomes possible. Like rain falling into the ocean. Like individual droplets returning to the vast body of water from which they came. This is how your separate, conditioned identity dissolves back into your larger, unconditioned being. But this dissolution rarely happens smoothly or painlessly. It requires courage to stand apart, to question what everyone around you accepts without thought, to allow the structures of your familiar self to crumble before the new has fully formed. The crowd will resist, the crowd will judge, the crowd will fear your transformation, not from malice but from the deep discomfort that arises when someone steps outside the collective trance. Your awakening is a mirror they may not wish to look into, a reminder of questions they have carefully avoided asking themselves. Your aloneness is a challenge to the unspoken agreement that we must all play by the same rules, see through the same lenses, operate within the same limitations. This creates a temporary but necessary aloneness, a sacred space in which you can finally hear the wisdom of your own being without the constant static of social expectation. You begin to feel the difference between thoughts that are yours and thoughts you have been taught to think. You begin to sense which desires arise from your essence and which have been programmed into you for someone else's benefit. You begin to distinguish between authentic joy and the hollow rewards of meeting external expectations. Now, I'm not saying that this means rejecting community or human connection altogether. That would be merely trading one form of delusion for another. We are, after all, inherently social creatures with a deep need for belonging. But true belonging can only emerge from authentic being. You cannot genuinely connect with others until you know who you are beneath the layers of conditioning. You cannot offer your gifts until you have unwrapped them from the packaging of social expectation. You cannot love from your essence until you have distinguished your essence from your programming. You may have noticed that the most profound moments of your life occurred when you were alone. Those instances of sudden clarity, of deep peace, of insight that changed your understanding of yourself and the world. They rarely happen amid noise and distraction. in crowds or conversations. They arrive in moments of quietude, when the waters of your mind have had time to settle, when the constant chatter of collective thought has faded enough for your deeper knowing to rise to the surface. Just as the seed must break open in the darkness of soil before it can reach toward light, consciousness requires periods of inward turning, of apparent isolation, to undergo its most significant transformations. Would the Buddha have awakened if surrounded by constant companionship, by the incessant demands of social interaction? Would Jesus have discovered his purpose without those 40 days in the desert? Would any great mystic, artist, scientist, or visionary have accessed their unique gift without first stepping away from the collective mind? This is the third and perhaps most powerful reason why chosen ones must walk alone. There exists a generative power in conscious solitude that cannot be accessed in any other state of being. But let us be clear about an important distinction. Conscious solitude differs fundamentally from lonely isolation. Loneliness is a state of perceived disconnection, a painful sense of being cut off from others, an experience of lack and loss. Conscious solitude, by contrast, is a state of heightened presence, of increased connection to oneself and to the deeper currents of life, an experience of fullness and discovery. One depletes, the other generates. One contracts consciousness, the other expands it. The suffering of unwanted loneliness bears no resemblance to the fecund silence of chosen aloneness. A man I knew spent 30 years pursuing success as defined by his culture. He achieved everything he was supposed to want, climbing to the pinnacle of his profession, accumulating wealth, influence, and recognition. Yet satisfaction remained elusive, always one more achievement away. When a personal crisis finally forced him to stop, to withdraw from his frantically busy life, he found himself in a small cabin by a lake with nothing to do and nowhere to go. For weeks he felt lost, anxious, purposeless. But gradually, as he synced with the rhythms of nature, as he watched the sun rise each morning over still waters, something began to shift. In that space of chosen solitude, stripped of external validation and distraction, he began to feel a call toward work he had never considered, work that aligned with a part of himself he had long ago abandoned to meet others' expectations. He discovered purpose not through striving, but through listening. Here lies a paradox central to the spiritual journey. By fully embracing your solitary path, by accepting and even welcoming the necessary distance created by awakening, you become capable of deeper connection than ever before. Not the superficial connection based on shared conditioning and mutual validation of delusion, but authentic connection rooted in presence and truth. The eagle soars alone, not from arrogance but necessity, and from that height it sees connections invisible from the ground. It perceives the patterns, the unity underlying apparent diversity, the invisible threads binding all life into a single tapestry of meaning. As the first light of dawn breaks across the horizon, it does not immediately banish all darkness. There is a gentle transition, a liminal space where darkness and light intermingle. This is the nature of awakening as well. The new understanding does not arrive all at once, fully formed and perfect in its clarity. It emerges gradually, through cycles of insight and integration, solitude and engagement, stepping away and returning with new vision. The spiritual path is not a straight line, but a spiral, returning again and again to similar terrain, but always at a higher level of perception. Conscious solitude serves as the dawn of new understanding, the first light revealing landscapes previously hidden in darkness. In that gentle illumination, you begin to see yourself, others, and all of existence with fresh eyes, unburdened by the accumulated dust of cultural conditioning and consensus reality. What seemed separate reveals its fundamental connectedness. What appeared solid shows its fluid nature. What felt constricted expands into previously unimagined possibilities. The chosen ones walk alone precisely because they are chosen to reveal new paths for others. Their solitude serves a purpose beyond personal growth or individual liberation. By stepping outside the collective trance, they create openings through which fresh air can flow into stagnant systems of thought and being. They become scouts venturing into unmapped territories of consciousness, returning with reports that expand our shared understanding of what is real, what is possible, what is true. Their apparent separation is, paradoxically, an act of service to the very collective they have temporarily left behind. This necessary solitude ultimately serves greater connection. The one who has discovered their authentic voice can speak truth that resonates at levels unavailable to those merely echoing cultural scripts. The one who has accessed their essential nature can offer presence not clouded by the static of unconscious conditioning. The one who has mapped their inner territory can guide others through similar terrain with compassion born of direct experience. What begins as a solitary journey culminates in a gift offered back to the collective, enriching the very community that could not accompany you on your path. You see, the path of the enlightened is never crowded, but it widens with each solitary walker who braves its course. Each one who dares to stand apart, to question the unquestionable, to see with their own eyes rather than borrow the sight of others, creates new possibility for all. Their courage carves footholds in the mountainside that make the climb less treacherous for those who follow. Their insight illuminates passages previously shrouded in darkness. Their willingness to walk alone ultimately makes it possible for more to undertake the journey. The eagle soars not to escape the earth, but to gain perspective that serves its return. The seed enters darkness not to flee the light, but to gather strength for its emergence. And the chosen one walks alone, not to abandon humanity, but to discover what it truly means to be human. This is the profound truth beneath the necessary solitude of awakening, the purpose behind the apparent separation, the connection hidden within aloneness. Those who are truly chosen never remain alone forever. They simply pioneer the path that, in time, calls to others ready to discover their own unique relationship with the infinite.